This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 2 of Here's How, published on the 11th of March 2015. In this episode, Ireland's new postcode system, Eircode, the forthcoming marriage referendum, and can schools pick and choose which ethnic groups they want to admit?
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
First, a couple of things. I want to say thanks to the guys at the Is It a Bicycle podcast for advice on getting this podcast off the ground. And they present their own podcast, they being Mark and Sean Leonard, Stephen Wrigley and Michael McDonough. Their podcast is about film and TV, and if you haven't heard of it already, just Google Is It a Bicycle and you'll find it there straight away. Also, apologies for the sound quality on this podcast. I don't have my usual equipment, but that will be all sorted out for the next episode, I hope. Now, in the last podcast, I talked about the rules that the central bank is proposing to limit the amount of a mortgage that first-time buyers can get to 90% of the value of the house that they're buying, and for other buyers to 80%. In other words, not allowing 100 and 110% mortgages. On the 9th of March, the Irish Independent ran a story by Colm Kelpie under the headline, "Central Bank Gets the Blame as Construction Growth Decreases." And the first couple of sentences of that story were as follows. The central bank's new mortgage deposit rules have been blamed for contributing to a sharp fall in the growth of construction, with house building stagnating, a survey shows. But the slowdown has spread into commercial and civil engineering as well. Now let's leave aside for a moment the fact that the Irish Independent, along with the Irish Times, were the lead cheerleaders for the type of property porn that we had during the housing bubble. And also that summary isn't exactly correct. At least it wouldn't give you a correct impression. There isn't less housing or less anything else being built. The amount of building is increasing, but what that report, it's a report from the Ulster Bank, what that report is saying is that the rate at which the building is increasing is reducing. That's to say, we're building and we're building more, but we're not increasing as quickly as we had increased before. But let's examine that for plausibility. The central bank rules limiting mortgages to a maximum of 90% of the value of the property were announced on the 28th of January. The data in this report refers to construction activity for the month of February. Colm Kelpie talks about a slowdown in house building. It's not a slowdown, it's just a lower rate of increase. But he says, and I quote, the slowdown has spread into commercial and civil engineering as well. I've read the report and they use a particular metric, and by that metric, housing went down 4 points, but commercial activity, that's supermarkets and offices and the like, went down 7 points. So speculation aside, on a purely factual basis, the Ulster Bank report doesn't say what Colm Kelpie says it says. But anyway, let's look at the speculation. What they're speculating is that when first-time buyers are being required to have a 10% deposit, that's to say not getting a 100 or a 110% mortgage, and that, by the way, those rules haven't taken effect yet, but those rules, or just the announcement of those rules, has meant that people have cancelled office blocks, roads, bridges, supermarkets that they were planning for years, and within a couple of weeks of that announcement, they've cancelled their plans and stopped the building works. That's not just untrue. That's the most ridiculously untrue statement I've seen in an Irish newspaper in a long, long time, and that's saying something. So that leaves us with one question. Why is an Irish newspaper trashing its own reputation in an effort to criticise very, very moderate rules designed to protect home buyers in an effort to reinflate the property bubble? Answers in a voicemail, please.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
The schoolboy John Stokes was refused admission to the Christian Brothers High School in Clonmel in 2009 because he was not the child of a past pupil. Given that he was a member of the travelling community and that travellers have a very poor record of accessing education, his mother took a case saying that this was indirect discrimination. In February, that case was ultimately rejected by the Supreme Court. The rule only admitting the children of past pupils effectively excludes all travellers from that school, a school almost entirely funded by the taxpayer. It seems to me that it also permanently excludes Nigerian, Polish and all other immigrants and all of their descendants. Dr. Darius Whelan is a lecturer of law at University College Cork, and he joins me on Here's How. Now, Dr. Whelan, what do you think of the ruling?
I think really the Supreme Court could have given us more analysis based on European law, for example. What they do is they engage in an analysis of the meaning of indirect discrimination in isolation in this Act, without referring to employment equality case law, for example, which is very well developed. And I might just mention, just for clarification, that the school wasn't saying that it would never admit a child who didn't have a parent in the school.
Sure, but with that, they're at least retaining the option of never admitting anybody who is not white, ethnically Irish non-travellers.
Well, what they did was, to be fair to them, they gave preference, to the children of parents who had been to the school. There was a lottery stage then afterwards. So obviously you had you didn't get automatic admission. You went into the lottery. So this boy was in the lottery, but he failed to gain a place in the lottery. So the legal issue then is whether they should have given preference as regards parents, people who had parents in the school. And as I say, I think the court should have engaged in a more detailed analysis here, because it's a big question. And there are certainly arguments which were made, for example, by the Equality Authority along the lines that really the parental rule does indirectly discriminate against travellers and, as you suggest, possibly also people of other races.
So to put it bluntly, would you, if you had been sitting on the Supreme Court, would you have ruled differently?
I think it's likely I would, yes. I don't like to second guess them too much because I don't have all the full submissions and so on. But yeah, ultimately, for the sake of the argument at least, I think it's highly likely I would have ruled differently. I mean, the Equality Tribunal had ruled differently at the lower stage, and they have expertise in the area. They went through the analysis as I think I would have done, and found that this was a discriminatory rule. And
if you were to leave aside the law, this school is pretty much entirely funded by the taxpayer through various means. Is it acceptable, the law aside, is it morally acceptable that people living and working in the country, paying taxes to fund a school to which they are either not going to be admitted or at best are going to be admitted on a much inferior basis?
Ultimately, no, I don't think so. I think it reinforces the idea of a privileged class, that certain people have priority. The people who currently live in Clonmel, basically, I suppose, because they're the ones who will have fathers who've gone to that school. And morally speaking, that's not justifiable. I think these rules were drawn up perhaps at a time when Ireland wasn't as diverse as it is nowadays.
Okay. Well, Dr. Whelan, thank you very much for that. And from one law lecturer to another.
My name is Ivana Bacik, Labour Senator for Dublin University and a lecturer in criminal law at Trinity College, Dublin. I want to talk about the forthcoming referendum on marriage equality, due to be held in May 2015 in Ireland. The key issue in this referendum is equality, equal rights to marry for gay and straight couples. We know that in Ireland significant progress has already been made towards equality for gay people after a very late start. We only decriminalised homosexuality 22 years ago, in 1993. Since then, we've passed laws prohibiting discrimination on grounds of sexuality, recognising civil partnerships for same-sex couples, and we're currently making provision for the rights of children within gay families through the Children and Family Relationships Bill, currently passing through the Oireachtas. However, equality in marriage remains a critical civil liberties issue for this generation, not just in Ireland, but internationally. Around the world, the movement for marriage equality has been gaining momentum in recent years. Since same-sex marriage was first legalised in the Netherlands in 2001, it has been recognised in 18 countries worldwide, including most of Western Europe, and now in the majority of US states. In a few months' time, the US Supreme Court will rule on the issue, following over 60 judgments across lower courts in America which have already recognised the right to marry for gay couples. Things have certainly moved on since October 2006, when I appeared as one of the legal team for Catherine Zappone and Anne-Louise Gilligan in their courageous and groundbreaking case seeking recognition in Ireland of their Canadian marriage. At that time, civil partnership had not yet been legalised, and in the US, only a small number of states then recognised gay marriage. We lost our case in December 2006 when the Irish High Court ruled that the traditional definition of marriage was confined to opposite-sex couples. Even then, we believed this decision lacked logic, and given legal developments since then, it appears even more illogical. An argument that marriage must be confined to heterosexual couples because it was ever so amounts to circular reasoning. The truth is that, as we all really know, the definition or meaning of marriage is not fixed in any society, and it has changed and evolved over time. Our traditional conceptions of marriage have changed substantially over the years. At one time it was thought that a woman upon marriage became the property of her husband. Until 1995 it was not legally possible to have a divorce in Ireland. So it's not justifiable to deny gay couples the right to marry just because so few societies recognise same-sex marriage until relatively recently, and because the view of marriage was considered to be confined to opposite-sex couples until relatively recently across other countries. There is, in fact, I say, no rational basis for the denial of the right to marry for gay couples. The state does not generally interfere in people's choices as to whom they marry, and the only rational basis for any state restriction on the right of adults to marry is where the choice of partner might involve potential harm.
Cian Brady from Mothers and Fathers Matter. Senator Ivana Bacik says there's no reason not to go ahead with marriage equality. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree, and I actually don't accept the term marriage equality for a start. I don't accept this as an equality issue. Mm-hmm. Article 40 of our Constitution states that all citizens shall, as human persons, be held equal before the law. And this is the position in our country, and I think it actually does a kind of disservice to our country as such to say that not all our citizens are being granted full equality. The equal protection of our laws applies to people, not actions or relationships. Mm-hmm. Laws exist precisely to differentiate between different kinds of actions and relationships. So, for example, 2 14-year-olds are not being denied equal rights because they're not allowed to marry due to their age. Mm-hmm. Even beyond that, just the term marriage equality, Dr. Sean O'Connell, he's a lecturer in constitutional law at UCC, has said that if the government wants to ensure public confidence in the referendum process, they should abandon the term marriage equality, as it implies the opposition is opposed to equality, as opposed to certain principles beyond that. So I think for all those reasons, the term marriage equality is not fair. But I'm happy to answer the question if you want to ask me as to why I'm voting no.
Sure, yeah. Well, leaving aside the term, and you can quibble about that, that's not, everybody's entitled to their own vocabulary. But on the basis of it, absolutely. But just to address exactly the issue, is there any reason not to go ahead and allow a gay marriage, or however you want to phrase it? Sure.
I'm happy to answer that question. Thank you. Well, look, let me start by saying, I have people across the LGBT spectrum close to my heart, and I accept that my position on this referendum causes hardship. Some same-sex couples want access to marriage, and it causes upset and hurt when they are denied it, and that's something I regret, and I think it's something that everyone I speak on behalf of regrets also. However, same-sex marriage advocates and voters must also acknowledge and accept that passing this referendum will mean that the state can no longer recognise the preferred good of mother, father, parenting and marriage. And same-sex married couples will have a constitutional right to have a family, which by its nature will deprive a child of either its mom or a dad. And this too is a hardship on the child. So I'm simply coming at it from the point of view that I as a voter and we as a society have to ask ourselves, which of these competing interests requires the most protection in our laws? I personally feel that the interests of children, who will have no say in the circumstances into which they are born, should take precedence over the desires of adult same-sex couples who already have civil partnership, which is essentially marriage in everything but name.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose for people who are listening to this podcast and for voters, who might have, qualms about this, I just don't think that the position that I'm adopting, is anything unreasonable or discriminatory against members of the LGBT community. Okay.
Sure. Well, you're entitled to your views. How would you react to the perception that the focusing on particularly children involved is sort of an admission that you've lost the argument specifically on marriage?
I don't understand. So what you're saying is that
the comment
as such, or there
any speaker on the no side of the referendum seems to focus exclusively on the issue of children. Okay. Does that mean outside of that particular issue you would kind of say there's no real argument?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all. I think that, children are inexplicably related to the family, Article 41, and marriage as such. I think beyond that, there would also be areas that might, in terms of public policy, that might be affected by, admitting same-sex couples to marriage, okay? Mm-hmm. For example, where would you draw the line in terms of what other unions would you recognize? Those type of issues arise also. But I mean, fundamentally, what I would say is that the majority of opposition would be centered around the fact that people would see marriage as the unit within which children are reared by their biological parents. So I think it's natural that the argument is centered around that on the first principle.
I understand. Dr. Paul Dalton, the president of the Psychological Society of Ireland, he quoted just recently the American Psychological Association, and the quote that he took up from them was, "On the basis of remarkably consistent body of research on lesbian and gay parents and their children, the APA, that's the American Psychological Association, and other health professional and scientific organizations have concluded that there is no scientific evidence that parenting effectiveness is related to parental sexual orientation. That is, gay and lesbian parents are as likely as heterosexual parents to provide supportive and healthy environments for their children." Would you accept that's the professional view?
Okay. Well, did he mention the Journal of Social Science Research and the article or the study by Lauren Marks in July 2012 by any chance?
I don't have. I'm not aware of it personally. No.
Okay. Well, it said as the conclusion by the American Psychological Association is not empirically warranted due to 7 central anomalies. Okay, but just to give you 3 were homogeneous sampling, absence of comparison groups, and contradictory data. Okay. So I think that, and I'm going to be very reasonable here when I explain where I'm coming from on this. I think that no social science is perfect in this nature, given the relatively recent phenomenon of same-sex parenting. Okay, mm-hmm. I think that the burden of evidence, the substantial evidence would support, the idea that children being reared by their biological parents in marriage is the best outcome. But I think that no study has reached the levels required for top-class quality social science research. Okay, now let me give you an example. Okay,
yeah.
In a survey of 49 studies in 2010, one researcher found that their mean sample size was only 39 children. Okay, the 2012 study by Mark Regneros at the University of Texas identified only 39 young adults who had lived with same-sex couples for more than 3 years out of 2,988 cases. Okay, mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, the recent phenomenon doesn't kind of allow for measures of children's outcomes over a number.
That's fair enough. What you're essentially saying is that there's a small research base there, is what you're saying. And but
let me say something to you, just in response to that study you've cited. Okay, the Regneris study was based on a large, random, and nationally representative sample, and it found that children reared by their married biological parents were found to have fared better on dozens of indicators, and worse on none than children of parents, at least one of them who had a gay or lesbian relationship. Okay, now, even given the limitations of that study, Professor Paul Amato maintained that the study's methods made it probably the best we can hope for, at least in the near future. Okay. So I think that, look, the studies are inconclusive on all sides. I believe the burden is on our side, but to say that the case is closed is just entirely unreasonable, you know.
Okay.
And I suppose, well, let me just put it, just in summary, okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fine Gael who are pro this marriage referendum, okay, right? The political grouping, okay, to which Fine Gael belongs in the European Parliament, the European People's Party, contends, and I'm quoting directly here, by any scientific and empirical evidence, the family is the safest haven for raising children.
That's a political point of view.
Fine Gael are going to have to reconcile, you know, that with their own approach to this.
Sure. They're essentially, I mean, you're pointing out they're essentially at odds with their larger political grouping within Europe.
I mean, we can assume that the European People's Party are basing on some foundation. They refer to both scientific and empirical evidence, so it's not just a kind of a group of people saying. Well,
that's essentially that party is essentially the Christian Democrat parties and so forth. Yes, yeah, exactly. But that's a political organisation. It's not a psychological association.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, look. Do you want to look beyond it? Do you want to get into a debate on gender?
Let's
believe that every child is a mother and father, and every child has a right to a mother and father, and as much as possible, the state should vindicate that right. That is much more important than the right of two men and women having a family. So I don't think that you would accuse Leo Varadkar of being biased, in favour of against the marriage.
Well, that's for Leo Varadkar to answer, but I think we can guess what that might be. But to maybe go to a more kind of specific sample, there was a teenage girl who spoke and wrote very eloquently about her gay dads. She's reared by two men. Take her class at school. Does she or any of her cohort of teenagers benefit by not permitting her parents to get married?
Well, I mean, William, to be honest, I'm not particularly comfortable, commenting on the 15-year-old child in question, okay? Right?
Well, in a general sense.
Except to say that I actually read the letter, and I thought it was a lovely letter, and I think she's got an extremely bright future, and I wish her the best. So, I mean, besides that, I don't want to, I suppose, beyond that, comment on her particularly,
Well, then, in a general sense.
If you want to raise the issue, William, in terms of, letters being written by children of gay parents. Have you read the letter of Katie Foss that was written to the Supreme Court in February 2015?
I haven't, but...
Have you read the testimonies of Dr. Joanna Rose in relation to her being conceived through sperm donation? So, I mean, look, I think neither letter, ends the debate on either side. I think
absolutely
both have their rights and their grievances, okay?
No, but...
if you're asking me, sorry, okay.
Put it this way. In a general sense, if you have some, and let's face it, it's a very small number, but if you have a small number of children being raised by gay or lesbian parents, and the great majority of children being raised in either what might be viewed as a traditional family or perhaps with single parents, are any of those groups at a disadvantage for allowing the gay parents to marry?
Are they at a disadvantage? I'm saying what would be the advantage? The Child and Family Relations Bill strengthens the guardianship rights, so I don't see a particular advantage in them, in their parents being allowed to marry either.
Sure. So, so surely the presumption then must be that you allow people the maximum freedom if it doesn't interfere with anybody's rights.
Sorry, your point is, that same-sex couples should be allowed to marry because to not allow them would be an infringement of their rights.
Well,
but I'm after saying that the law exists specifically to differentiate between actions and relationships. Okay, like for example, why? Okay, the state has no interest in allowing same-sex couples to marry. Okay, right? If that's to answer your question, okay, because prior to civil relationships bill, couples were allowed to sort out their affairs as to how they wanted to do it. The state has no interest in their relationships because they're not capable of producing children. Does that make sense? Okay, so, I mean, why would they allow, say, same-sex couples to marry in that case?
Okay, Cian Brady from Mothers and Fathers Matter, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, William.
If you liked the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter. Tell your friends. But most of all, make your views heard. Call us on 076 603 5060.
Joining me now on the Here's How podcast is computer consultant Antoine O'Loughlin. Antoine, you've written a few times about Aircode, the proposed new postcode for Ireland. What is your view on it?
This postcode isn't a great solution to the problem that Ireland has with addressing. The reason why is just because the system that's been devised is just too complicated and just too different from the very standard postcode systems that have emerged around the world.
Would you say, Antoine, that we have particular needs, given that like 40% of our addresses are non-unique? So, for example, on that road that I grew up on, at the time there was maybe 70 houses. Now maybe there's 150. Every single one of those houses has an identical address, and indeed because of the way that ribbon development happens in Ireland with splitting up of plots from family farms, there were many houses with the same surname, and even at least one example of houses with the same surname, the same first name of the head of the household, and exactly the same address. Don't we need something that goes into much more detail?
Yeah, we definitely need something that goes into more detail and deals with that serious problem you described. But the problem, in a way, is even bigger than you described, because even among names of places, where the addresses are supposedly different, quite often the names are very similar. So, for example, there's Stradballys all over the country. The National Ambulance Service tells me that there are no fewer than 5 Warrenstowns in County Meath. Warrenstown are very similar names. Even within Dublin 4, there are 2 Pembroke cottages. About a mile or two away from each other with no distinguishing name. So that's a problem. That's a problem for the post on post, but it's a horrendous problem for ambulances and fire brigades. And I know that kind of a lot of people, there's sort of a lot of backslapping hilarity about people getting the wrong post. That's not quite so funny when somebody gets the bank statement or the mortgage statement of their cousin or their relative. But if it's an ambulance, I know there's at least one example of an ambulance going to a correct address, but the wrong instance of the correct address, and somebody dying in that instance. But I know that there has been questions about the random nature of the second part of the postcode. So as I understand it, each area will be assigned the first 3 digits, which might be D15 for Dublin 15 or something else for some other county. Everybody in that area, then their postcode would begin D15, and then there would be 4 randomly assigned characters. And those 4 characters would not be the same 4 characters, and in fact none of them would be the same as their next door neighbour. Now, to me that seems like a good idea, and the reason it seems like a good idea is because of those very similar addresses that I gave on the road that I grew up on. It means that if all of the address, including the person's name, is identical, the postcode will be very distinctive. Yes, it is a very good idea for each house to somehow be coded differently, to have a different number. That's an extremely good idea. The issue here is the randomness. That is that the codes of 2 houses that are adjacent to each other will have completely different 4-letter codes. They won't be even slightly similar. They're guaranteed to be completely different from one another.
As I understand it, it actually goes further than that not only will they be completely different, they will also be completely different to all of the other Warrenstowns in County Meath, for example. So not only will they make sure that all the postcodes in one particular Warrenstown will be quite dissimilar from each other, they'll be dissimilar from all the other Warrenstowns. To me, that sounds like a good idea.
That's, the scope there is very big, but the problem is that how are these codes? Nobody's ever done anything like that, and the issue is that if you look at the code, you won't be able to tell where that code pertains to. The code won't in itself tell you anything useful about what part of the county the person is in.
Unless you look it up in a database.
Unless you look it up in a proprietary database, which is the model which is the model.
Okay, Antoine O'Loughlin, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for speaking to us on Here's How.
Okay, thank you.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
I'm joined now by Gary Delaney, who is the CEO of Locate Code. Gary, tell me what your problem is with Eircode.
Well, Eircode is, as you know, Ireland's proposal as a national postcode, except that we're coming to the postcode a little bit late, maybe almost a century late. So therefore, as a postcode, really Ireland doesn't need a postcode for sorting mail. We need to look at something which is more modern, more technology-based, and more oriented towards other people.
Let me come back to you on that, because I grew up on a road that now has maybe about 150 houses. None of them are numbered. A couple of them have sort of vanity names on the houses, but basically the post was delivered by the postman happening to know who lived in each house, usually, not always. And for example, there would have been several families who had the same surname because they were, cousins and whatever, on that road. And I can see that each of those, which I think is the proposal from Eircode, each of them having their own individual code, making sure that the right bills and the right bank statements go to the right house is very important.
Absolutely, but and that's the idea, so that not only can that happen, but so can the couriers deliver, and so can the man delivering the carpet. But I think you'll agree with me if I say to you that on post, and no postman would ever, and has not ever in any country ever delivered on the basis of a postcode. The postcode is used for sorting the mail and for making sure that the mail goes into his particular sack for his particular route. But
don't we have a unique situation in Ireland whereby maybe 40% of the houses don't have a unique address? So
yes.
Again, on the road that I grew up, every house has essentially exactly the same address. So if you combine the postcode and the actual address, that gives you a unique and very foolproof way of identifying the house.
Absolutely, William. But I think where we're getting stuck is the fact that the postcode is not really for delivering mail. I agree with everything that you've said, and absolutely correct. We have a unique problem in Ireland that our addressing system is poor, but it is never going to be the case that the postman will deliver the mail using the postcode. He will do exactly as he has done up to now. He will deliver it on the basis that he uses local knowledge to deliver. When we talk about a postcode for Ireland, it really isn't about postmen, and it's an unfortunate term. Where we use the term postcode because it's a legacy term, it's something that other countries have used and evolved into modern uses, but we're jumping into the modern uses era element of a postcode. On Post have said for many, many years that they don't need a postcode, that they do sorting by other methods. So it would be wrong if we focused on Eircode as solely a means by which mail or post is going to be delivered by An Post, because that isn't the main purpose. Sure,
it has other purposes, but I mean, for example, I did a test when I was researching my book a few years back, and I was able to have 20 different letters with 20 different addresses delivered to my house by combining the Irish language name and different locality names and so forth. That's a nightmare if you can't uniquely identify a house. For example, if I was minded to, I could very easily commit insurance fraud and appear to be different people at different addresses and get all the posts to my address.
Absolutely, yes, William, and that I agree with you absolutely, and therefore. And again, I'm not disagreeing with anything that you've said. I would just contend that when we talk about postcode, it would be better, actually, if we didn't use the word post and we could use everything else code, perhaps.
Or Eircode.
Or Eircode, yeah, as what it's about, because you just said there insurance fraud and all that kind of stuff. Really, every one of those addresses that you use, the 20 or more addresses that you use to have your post delivered, on Post will handle, because at the end of the day they use big pointers, and then it's the postman who resolves the final bit by local knowledge. So I suppose when we're looking to air code, we're looking for something that is going to satisfy the wide needs of this economy, of this modern economy, and therefore when we examine it and we kind of score it out of 10, we have to take into account more than just on post. In fact,
For example, what do we need to...
For example, online purchases nowadays are rapidly growing. In fact, grew by 1 billion euros in terms of purchase value this year in Ireland. Huge, 25% increase in value of online purchases. A good percentage, a larger percentage than on post of that is delivered by independent couriers. And they don't have the resources and the infrastructure to put in place the same processes that on post does. So they have to deal with handling that delivery to your door in a different way, and the courier network delivers that in what they call a multi-drop scenario. So they don't have one guy on the same route every day like on post, and they don't have the value therefore or the benefit of local knowledge. They have to manage that in a wholly different way, and that's where the postcode, the everything code, the air code must stand up to their requirements, because they're actually going to be the biggest users. The biggest users of...
Well, for example, when I go to Northern Ireland and I type in the postcode into the GPS, it gets me almost exactly to the location, and then it asks for the street number, and that brings me right down to the house.
Yes.
And how is that going to be different? Apart from the fact that I won't have to put the street number, I'll just have to put the air code only into the GPS when I'm going to an address in Ireland.
Yes, that's true. That's provided that it gets to... provided that, we'll say, navigation devices handle this in the first place, but let's assume that they do. In many, many cases, what you said there, the postcode handles the street first, and then ask you for a property number. So we're not going to do things exactly the same in Ireland as they did in the UK, because we don't deal in property numbers, or a large percentage of our properties don't have property numbers in the first instance, or people don't use them, which is something that they have to deal with in the UK as well. So we now have to we have to take some of what was learned in the UK postcode system and apply it to here. Some of the best parts of it, and one of the best parts of the UK postcode system is that it will define street levels. So in other words, in the UK, as you rightly said, the postcode will take you to a street, and then if you know the property number, you'll get to the final way. Street level knowledge is valuable in people's heads because it's learnable, and you can iterate it. And by iterate, I mean is that if you went to number 25, if you went to, let's say, street P25 yesterday, and you now have to go to street P26 today, well, iteratively you'll say, well, that's very close together. The problem with air code...
I understand that, and I've read about what you kind of objected on the sense that air code, the second part of that air code is going to be random. Everybody in a given area their air code, the first bit of it will be the same, the second part of it will be randomized. But given that if you had them sequential, that would mean that people who have identical addresses would then have identical but for one digit postcodes. Wouldn't that be a recipe for error?
I don't think so. Obviously, there are people who argue that, but that has so many advantages. First of all, if I make a small mistake, I don't go to a completely wrong area. Okay, so what you just said to me was that if everybody has the same local part of the code, let's say P24, we'll just call it P24, and that the only difference is one last character, as an example. It doesn't have to be exactly like that, but let's say take that as an example. Then if I get the last character wrong, I'm still on the right street. I can solve the problem by asking a question or visualizing what I see in front of me. But,
I understand. I understand what you're saying.
But if I do the alternative, though, just to finish the point, is that if it's random and I make a small mistake, I can be in completely the wrong location by tens of kilometers, which is more significant.
That's presuming you're using the code only and not the address at all.
Sure, but don't forget that argument is used quite frequently, and yes, that would be absolutely correct if we were in the UK, where they have a good addressing system, or a relatively good addressing. Don't forget, what we're trying to resolve in Ireland is a poor addressing system, and we're trying to resolve it without changing the addressing system. So the 750,000 odd properties in Ireland that don't have property numbers and don't have street names associated with them cannot resolve something that is also ambiguous in terms of a postcode. So just what you said was, but if I make a mistake with the air code, but I can use the street address or the property address to help me solve that. But that's not the fact for nearly 800,000 properties in this country that already have ambiguous addresses, which you mentioned at the outset. So,
I think actually that's not correct, because one of the reasons why coding air code is not such a simple job is because every similar named townland is going to be given a second part of the air code that is not similar. So if you have a townland, for example, as we were talking earlier about Warrenstown, and your second part of the code is ABC1, not only will ABC2 not be used in your Warrenstown, it won't be used in any Warrenstown. Doesn't that provide some level of cross-checking?
That's fine, but what you're saying is what it won't do. Whereas the argument that the point we were taking a minute ago is what it should do. So yes, you can design a code not to do certain things, but isn't it better to design a code to do certain things? So what we're saying is that air code has been designed to be random. Air code has been designed so that it has no, we call it street level accuracy. I don't mean that absolutely street level. It can be a locality, it can be whatever. So we're saying that it has been designed not to have those, and it's being designed to deliberately make sure that we don't have confusion at a much broader level. So maybe the design is focused on the wrong thing. At the end of the day, what we want to do is to be able to find places. Now,
I understand. Gary Delaney, thank you very much for talking to me. We have to leave it there. That's Gary Delaney, CEO of Locate Code. Thank you very much.
Make your view heard. Record your own contribution and email it to podcast@here'show.ie. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
And that's all for episode 2 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Sorry about the ropey sound quality at points. We'll be back on proper equipment for the next episode, which will be up soon. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or any other podcast application or software. Please rate the show on iTunes or anywhere else you can find. And also please share it on Facebook and on Twitter. The next show will be up soon. Thanks for listening.